And we got love. We got the big, beautiful abolitionist dreaming of Junauda Petrus. We've got a universal love that we inherit from our ancestors to carry us through. And I see a deep connection in that abolitionist dreaming of Junauda Petrus's poem to the theology that we are trying to live here in our Universalist and Unitarian Universalist community in these days and always. See, the Universalist God is a grandma too. Not specifically your grandmother, unless you really want to bring her to mind. Mine, for instance, was totally beloved and a hot mess of unaddressed trauma and dysfunction. No, the Universalist God is that archetype of a grandma that Petrus shows us in her book, the one whose love is so unrelenting that you cannot escape that love or its demands on your life. The one who sees through all of your despair, your rage, to the pain just beneath. Oh, honey, I know it hurts. The one who looks at your face and no matter what you have done in this life still sees the infant you were, made of nothing but possibility, and who sees all of that possibility still in you. Sweet baby, it's still there. The Universalist God is a grandma whose doors are always open, who never sends you away empty-handed. She's going to believe in you whether you think you deserve it or not. Pumpkin, you always deserve it. This grandma's going to call you on your stuff, but she's never giving up on you. You can make amends. You can have another try. She doesn't think you need to be scared into doing what's right. She knows what is possible when all of your needs are met. She wants all of your needs to be met. She holds a dream for you. She holds a dream for us, for a whole world of thriving, where everybody's needs are met, where everybody knows themselves beloved. Can you imagine what it would be like? Listen, none of us is that Universalist grandma God, even those of us who are grandmas. The depth and the width of a love like that is definitely beyond our pay grade and probably beyond our capacity. We are not a Universalist grandma God, and many of us wouldn't even use the word God to describe that great and sacred love. But what we are as a community is the direct inheritors of the Universalist tradition in America, which has always rejected every imagined hell and threat of eternal punishment, and has always put its faith instead in a love so deep and wide that it will not leave anyone or anything behind. As a community, we are the children of Universalist theology, and we could be its practitioners today. But if we are to be those Universalist heirs in any way that matters, we're going to have to dial in to Grandma's big dreams and transforming love in how we live and treat one another, and most importantly, how we order our communities. We're going to have to change some of the formative narratives taught to us by our culture, and we're going to have to resist and rebuild some very powerful structures. See, we are living in a moment and a society built almost entirely of narratives and theologies and structures and economies of punishment. We are living in a world shaped by theologies and structures of punishment and also punishment's buddies, disposability, control, and fear. These are the theologies that preach original sin and a violent atonement theology that literally finds salvation in punishment. And you know it's everywhere. but they are also in the slipperier cultural narratives that have us assuming children are being bad or are bad when they struggle to conform to our expectations. It's a system that believes some bodies are disposable and is ready to throw people away or lock people up at the slightest mistake. And maybe it makes us feel safer for a moment until we recognize that system could throw us away next. How did we get here? Maybe it started at the first human harm, when we had no idea how to reconcile or how to be safe again. And control looked enough like safety that we set out firmly down its path. And then there's the moment we've arrived at today, on the eve of an authoritarian regime with a punishing white nationalist vision of control. And that moment can certainly be traced right back to the advent of chattel slavery in this country. There's a direct line from then to today in America, when our country has locked away more of our citizens than any other nation in the world, in a deeply racialized system of violent policing and mass incarceration. The logic of punishment and control infects and affects all of us, but it lands most squarely in this nation on black and brown bodies, as it has intentionally done for centuries. When black folks are in prison for nonviolent drug convictions at a rate 10 times higher than their white counterparts who use drugs at the same rate, when the number of people incarcerated in this country has grown by 500% since 1970, obviously outpacing both population growth and crime rates, when we spend $80 billion a year to lock people away from their families and communities, only a minuscule percentage of whom could reasonably be considered a danger to our collective safety. And when Missouri Governor Mike Kehoe signed an executive order this week that could be described as a replay of the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, deputizing Missouri Highway Patrol officers as makeshift ICE agents to hunt down and kidnap and deport brown people back to what are all too often oppressive, exploitive, mortally dangerous circumstances that our country has helped create. Yes, we've been here before. And when harsh punishment dynamics play out according to race and other biases in our schools, and in our homes, and in our churches, well, y'all, we live in a country and a culture firmly built around empire's logic of punishment and disposability and control. And sweet babies, the Universalist God is weeping and cussing. This country got it wrong, wrong, wrong from the start. We greed and feared ourselves from the very beginning right into a culture where our first instinct, our very first one, is to control and punishment. And I know it's in me. Maybe you know it's in you too, that instinct. To send away the struggling child, or to lock up and throw away vast numbers of people, separating them from everything a human needs to thrive, connection and sufficiency, meaning and hope. Honey child, we hear her whisper, that never made any of us safer. It did make a few people very rich, and our communities so poor. And I know, it is hard to imagine an alternative. When the powers and principalities have created such devastation and deprivation and harm upon harm, and when those things inevitably come to live intimately among us. What is the pathway away from policing when there is violence in my neighborhood? What are the pathways from prisons when people cause such terrible harm? It is all so big. And to move away from punishment and control when they've got their tentacles into every single thing, well, we'd need a whole new world. Bingo, sweet babies. We'd need a whole new world. And it feels hard to imagine change that big, but our Universalist grandma whispers to us that we must imagine it, and we must practice it in our daily lives. The whole new world was never going to arrive all at once, but we can see it even now in pockets and moments and interactions between us when we change those instincts away from control and fear and toward care and love as our first response. You know, the early Universalists were very often asked, what is the point of a religion that isn't about scaring people into behaving with the fear of punishment? And the Universalists were really clear in their answer. Why are you wanting to misbehave so much? And also, the purpose of religion without punishment theology is to love the hell out of this world. The purpose is building heaven on this earth by our daily acts of hope and care. And this is our ancestors' answer for us too, as we encounter these massive and entrenched systems of punishment that are huge and that are very intimately inside of us. And we ask, how do we shift it? They tell us, resist the hells that we have created in prisons and violent policing. Redirect their funding, remove their power, and at the very same time, build the heavens. Invest in structures of care. Put all our resources toward meeting the needs whose deprivation creates legacies of desperation and harm. Work toward restorative practices, centering the needs of those harmed while building pathways to atonement and restitution and hope, knowing that humans are going to make mistakes. We're going to hurt each other, and we have to find better ways of coming back into community. We can channel our Universalist grandma, who still sees possibility in us all, even now, even still. And I have found that the people showing us how to do these things most strategically and systematically right now, right in this moment, are organizers and advocates in the contemporary movements for police and prison abolition, especially black and brown women and trans folk and men, whose work for liberation stretches back in an unbroken line through centuries of global freedom struggle against enslavement, apartheids, oppression, segregation, and more around the world. These organizers have been living out, putting into practice a profound Universalist theology, loving the hell out of this world and building pockets of heaven. They've been showing us the way. And while you may have heard some of their slogans about defunding the police, what some of you may not know is that most abolitionist organizers are dreaming and practicing a different world altogether. Yes, they are working to divest from policing and prisons, and they are also building resources for harm reduction in their neighborhoods, working to create practices of survivor-centered restorative justice, exploring mutual accountability in their daily lives, talking about how to apologize well and make amends materially, creating neighborhood and community safety teams that rely on deep relationships instead of threat of violence and force to make everyone safer. All the things we could be doing right here, right now. Police and prison abolition was never a naive call to only defund the police and empty out the prisons and stop there. It was always an invitation to deeply and radically reimagine how we can live together when we reorient ourselves and our resources away from the logic of punishment and control and toward an ethic of deeply communal care. The abolitionist organizers of today are showing us that ending the systems of punishment and harm actually requires us to build up wide and deep networks of care, embodying new ways of being with one another, understanding that putting our resources towards meeting people's needs is the best harm prevention strategy there is, and pointing out that policing doesn't prevent harm. It responds after the fact. It makes many people less safe in its militarized and armed methods, and it prioritizes protecting property and wealth as policing in this country was created to do. And I know many of my fellow white folks in the room were raised to see policing and prisons as protection to make us feel safer. But who is the us these carceral systems were set up to protect? There is no safety for us if it doesn't include all of us. On the eve of an inauguration, ushering in a promised authoritarian regime by and for billionaires, with a documented plan for mass deportation and wide-scale repression, the stakes of abolition in this time are as they have always been: the freedom of every single one of us. The freedom of our migrant siblings, yes. The freedom of our trans kin, absolutely. The freedom of Black and brown and indigenous Americans, always, but also every single one of us. The clearest thing laid out by Project 2025, the far-right plan for governance in this era, is the administration's intention to use our criminal justice system, the police, the courts, the prisons, and the inescapable surveillance structures of our society, to use that system to silence and repress and imprison anyone who falls outside of or resists the white nationalist framework in power. They have said that is their plan. They want to deport and imprison Black and brown folks, but also abortion seekers, trans folks, protesters, and dissidents. And they already have the massive structures in place to do it. It's what those systems of incarceration were built for: highly repressive control in the guise of safety in a fearful time and world. And this is where people of conscience, people of commitment to mutual freedom and thriving, people who care to resist authoritarianism and who simply want to care for each other, must make the connection that abolitionist frameworks are the way forward to the future we dream of, and that they always were. That divesting from carceral structures that the authoritarians will use and have always been using to control and punish and dispose of beloved human flesh is essential to resistance. And that investing in great grassroots structures of care and small, everyday acts of love, building those pockets of heaven, is the only way that we collectively survive the ongoing oppression. That our resistance to authoritarianism in this time might look less like big marches and rallies, and more like researching and strategizing how we can meet our safety needs without calling the police. Might look less like superhuman heroics and more like riding with Latine friends and neighbors on the highways, where patrolmen have been deputized to racially profile, kidnap, and deport them. And I'll remind you here that our Democratic Sheriff Dwayne Carey has always worked with ICE to deport those awaiting trial, whether they've been convicted of any crime or not. Resistance in this time might look less like vaguely funding the revolution and more specifically like funding the Boone County Community Bail Fund. This is the challenging truth, especially for those in the room socialized as white in this culture, that to resist in this time, we must interrogate what we thought made us safe, but actually kept us under control. The good news, though, is that the pathway to beautiful and hopeful resistance is nearer to our breath, threaded in our community's long lineage, and lived out by many neighbors in our community. That we here in this room are the children of Universalist theology, already deeply grounded in a faithful call to care over control and transforming love over theologies of punishment. That framework is already in our faith. It is in our bones, as much as the logic of empire is, this commitment to love the hell out of this world. And we can nurture and grow that faith. And we can throw our solidarity in with the abolitionist organizers who will show us how. Folks doing this work in our community with the John Brown Gun Club, the Como Mobile Aid Group, Boone County Community Bail Fund, so many other structures of organizing that are working to find other ways of being. And it is in our dreams, as much of as the logic of empire is, this commitment to build heaven among us. We can build structures of care and hope right here, right in this community. Some of our neighbors already are. So let's join them. Let's give our grandma reason to crow with pride. Those are my sweet babies. Look at them go.